Good morning, everyone. Ricardo Wilkins here, Microsoft Customer Success Manager for Teams Modern Workplace. Happy Friday. And you've joined another Teams office hours. The goal of this is just to have a 30-minute block where you can come on and just ask any question in the Q&A chat that you may have, and I'll try to answer it if possible. So feel free at any time to put a question in Q&A during this time, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A chat to try to answer those questions. Outside of that, I'll essentially sit with you for this 30 minutes, but also maybe try to talk through anything that kind of comes to the top of my mind, again, as I wait for any specific questions in Q&A chat. And so as I was logging into this morning, thinking about what to talk about, I went to my blog just to kind of see what I've posted lately, and the latest one being this infographic created related to what I would call being a star in Teams, where it talks about what I think are like the 4 minimum things that someone, especially someone new to Teams or it's your first Teams meeting, what are the minimum things I should be concerned about in this meeting? There's clearly lots of buttons to click, but what should I really focus on? So I thought I'd go through this a little bit. Can I make that any bigger? Well, I'll go through it live actually, but what we're seeing here is the S for sharing screen or video, the T for talking or basically muting, the A for the raise hand feature, ask a question, and the R for reading chat. So again, from my perspective, and I'll probably go in a different order than the actual star, but if I come to, let's fire up a meeting here. I'll just hit meet now, so I can just jump into a meeting without scheduling it. And so the first one, I think, certainly S.T.A.R, makes a nice little word, and so it starts with sharing, but really I would say the most important one is the T, or the talking, or the muting, essentially. I mean, coming in a meeting, you may or may not, need to talk in that meeting, but you want to be able to, know how to mute yourself or unmute yourself, and so that is that button there. For some of us, obviously, that have been in tons of meetings, that is almost a no-brainer. But if you're new to the video conferencing, concept, which many people were certainly thrust into that, that may not be a no-brainer. And so just understanding that if there was one button to kind of monitor, it's that microphone button. And a comment, I guess I'll say to that, is a couple things. So one, I believe it's Control-Shift-M, if I have that right. There is certainly a shortcut for muting. I think it's Control-Shift-M. But that would be helpful if, in case you can't find this button quick enough to unmute or even to mute yourself. You would need to have the Teams window active for that to really kick in. And then also I would point out that today, so I'm actually using a government version of Teams, the GCC version, which is why you see this here. If you're on a commercial version, I think that we have started rolling out, or will roll out, should be imminent, putting these controls up in the upper right area. And the reason that's significant, and I like it, is because this really kind of hovers over the meeting space area. There would certainly become some points in which that would disappear to kind of show you what's going on in the landscape, and you kind of have to bring your cursor back to get that back. And I think I would kind of guess they kind of recognize that, and maybe one of the reasons why they put those controls up here, where they will always be. As you can see here, it just disappeared. I have to bring my mouse back over for it to come back. they'll soon or now be in the commercial at least be persistent up here, so you'll always know where that mute button is and won't have to worry about that disappearing bar. So that's the other thing I'd say about the mute button. And then the last thing I'd say about the mute button is just depending on your hardware, there are different ways to interact with that as well. So for those that kind of use the those hockey puck kind of speakerphones, they may have their own mute button, which is useful. Again, it doesn't matter what's going on my machine. I can hit an actual hardware button to mute. And if you have a headset, some of those, well, they probably all have their own mute buttons. Some even have the boom mics where if you push the boom mic up, that's a mute as well. So muting, having said all of that, right? Muting isn't as simple as one might think. I mean, there's layers to it, right? There's hardware, there's the software button, there's the shortcut. So definitely a key piece there. I'll pause on this whole S.T.A.R thing and look at a couple of questions that are coming in the Q&A chat. Is there any way for a guest, an external vendor, to add attachments and to share screens? So, in a team meeting, certainly anyone that gets a link to the meeting with and has internet and a modern browser. So, well, specifically for this question, Edge or Chrome right now I think is the ones that do sharing desktop. But anybody on the planet with the internet and those browsers can come into a meeting, and assuming you haven't changed any policies in Teams, they can get in the team and they can definitely share a screen. The adding of attachments, that may depend, because I know I believe that anybody on the planet would come in and get a chat box at least, but whether they get the other things like we see here, the attachment button, all these other things, I think that may not be. I'd have to check. That may not be available for someone who's not part of the tenant. Or doesn't have their own Teams license or their own OneDrive account. That would be something I may have to follow up on, as I can't remember offhand what that looks like. In fact, we may be able to answer that quickly with a nice little search here. Let's actually go here. So we basically want Teams meeting. It's not really meeting roles, but I know there is a site that basically shows what each person can do. Maybe it is a meeting role. Let's go back here. Let's see here. So we got organizer, presenter, and attendee. I don't think that's necessarily, that's not really answering our question. It does answer the question of basically everybody can share content except someone marked as an attendee, which I can't show here. I don't have another person there, but that's something that you could right click on someone and demote them to an attendee. So it does kind of answer that question, but it doesn't answer our question related to attachment. So I can half answer that question in that, yes, in a meeting, I mean, I don't know if the meeting considers them external, like everybody in that meeting could be external as far as the meeting's concerned, but yeah, anybody in that meeting should be able to screen share, again, unless you've had some policy change in your tenant to prohibit it. But adding attachments, I'm not sure about. I'll have to follow up on that. And then the other question, are there recommendations specific to offering training on this platform? For example, settings, rules of participation, polling in Teams, etc. So my recommendation for training initially would be the main Teams learning area. So Microsoft Teams help, and I think it's this one here. So this is what I recommend because it's got a lot of stuff here, right? And so including um, this Teams training, if we hit explore. The reason I like this, and I think a lot of my customers like it, a long list of the typical things that you would want to learn about. In fact, even the other question we had might be answered in one of these, but also the fact that most of these are made up of small video snippets. And I think these days people tend to like the video snippets, as long as they're small, right? Not everybody's ready to do a half-hour video or something like that, but these tend to be a couple of minutes just answering the very specific question. And so, this is chock full of those very small like that. So this is what I usually recommend at a minimum is coming to the main page, just support.microsoft.com/teams, and there's a lot of information here. There's certainly more. YouTube has a lot of um, video help as well, but this is the one I usually point to. I would also say, if I can get this out the way, Microsoft Learning. And let's go, where is that? I believe it's learn.microsoft is what I was looking for. Learn, I just saw it. Where did it go? Yeah, is this it? Yeah, this is what I was looking for. Learn.microsoft.com. I think it resolves to docs.microsoft/learn. And I believe we could put this is I was going to say obviously, but it may not be obviously, but this is more like a course, and they are free. But there's definitely learning here, but more on from a feels got more of a course feel perspective, more so than just little snippets of video. So it'll really kind of take you through a curriculum per se. Let's see, yeah, lots of different stuff here. And you can see here even instructor-led training, all those kind of things. So between learn and the landing page, for teams learning, I would say those would be the two I'd recommend. And also, you mentioned, for instance, polling. Those kind of things I think would be in there as well. But again, between commercial and GCC, you may also need to check the Microsoft 365 roadmap to make sure something like polling, for instance, is part of, if you're in a GCC environment, make sure it's actually a part of the environment. And so you can see here, we can do a check for GCC to see GCC specific things. So some of the things you may want to do, and you may see education for, if you're GCC, you may need to come here and search and check and see if it's actually a part of the GCC tenant if you don't see it. So those are a few places to go, I think, for some learning help. Another question here, we set additional meeting links in the chat prior to a general meeting in hopes of allowing people movement to different rooms, but the links were not visible to the external vendors unless we added them during the live event. Any guidance on this? So you mentioned live event. So a couple things could have happened here. In the live event, there is a chat related to the presenters and producers, and then there's the chat related to the attendees. So again, if those external vendors were attendees, they would not see anything you put in the presenters chat. And then of course there's a Q&A or a chat for the attendees. So you said, but the links are not visible to extent unless we added them, right? So that kind of makes me think you added them, they saw it, so that means you were putting the links in the presenter producer chat, which is very specific to those few presenters and producers who are actually showing something to the thousands of attendees. if you wanted these thousands of attendees to join these other rooms with links, and you could certainly put that in the poll chat with an announcement if you're a producer or presenter in that live event. In that particular case, though, you'd be moving them from this public, large webinar style meeting into a Teams meeting room, which it's fine, but again, if you've got 10,000 people looking at your webinar, they're not going to fit in a Teams meeting. So not sure what the goal or vision is for that setup. Yeah, but hopefully that answers that. It kind of feels like the vendors were not part of the presenter producer chat, and that's why they couldn't see the links, which is by design. Okay. So yeah, definitely keep the questions coming. So I'll just jump back as we wait for more questions back to talking about meetings. Again, we talked more than actually expected about the mute button. So again, an important button, different ways to get at it. And then so that's the T in S.T.A.R. The S for sharing. I use that S for two things. One is sharing video, basically meaning just turning your video on. But the other S for sharing would just be sharing your desktop. And the main thing I tried to call out here is I made the suggestion in the graphic there of that screen one of the desktop might be the easiest. And the reason I point that out, I see often people will share a window, which is certainly fine. But if you're new to the whole video conferencing thing, you may be sharing a window expecting that everyone can see things that you click on, other windows you bring up, and that's not going to be the case, right? So if you showing an Excel or a Word doc and then you click something in the doc which brings something else up, we're not going to see that other thing. It's on your other monitor, or it's just not a part of the window you shared. So the simplest approach would be show us your whole desktop, which would be that screen number one or two if you've got multiple monitors. Screen number one is usually someone's main monitor or view. So that's the one where it's kind of like, I know you'll see whatever it is I'm clicking because you're seeing my entire desktop. So I just point that out. That's also useful, again, as long as you're okay with people kind of seeing your taskbar or any pop-ups you may have. That's the simplest. It also means that as you are switching between sharing things, you don't have to change or share. So if I have shared my browser window and now I want to share my PowerPoint, I've got to stop the share and now share a new window. If I'm just showing my desktop, I can switch between any number of windows and you'll see it all. And so that makes it easier for me as a presenter. So again, that's why I call screen number one the easiest approach. You certainly have plenty of other options there. And I think the other thing I was going to say there, I was talking about switching between, yeah, sharing your desktop. Again, you may not want to do that. You don't want me to see the pop-ups and whatnot. Fortunately, Windows 10 has a nice feature for that, right? It usually kicks in automatically when you share a PowerPoint presentation, especially full screen, or go to, what do they call it, presentation mode. But Windows 10, the little Action Center button, in my case, it's lower right corner. If I right click that, we have this Focus Assist feature, and you can actually get there as well by left clicking, and it's there. You can see it here. I think it's a little easier to use the right click Focus Assist. And if you don't want any banners while you're presenting, like I probably should do right now, although this is a demo environment, I shouldn't get many alarms, but alarms only would basically mean all those typical pop-ups like a new email message and whatnot would not show on your screen. So Focus Assist is good if you just are working on your own and just want to minimize pop-ups in general while you work, but certainly while you're sharing your desktop, that'll keep all your email messages and IMs and whatnot from popping up in front of the people who are viewing your presentation. So that's a little Windows 10 pro tip there. Again, that tends to pop up automatically when Windows kind of knows you are presenting. But there may be other times when it doesn't, and if it doesn't, then right-click Focus Assist. So hopefully that helps. So that's the desktop sharing, the S share, and that star, the T was the mute, and the A was the ask a question. That's the raised hand feature, which is relatively new, but at this point is rolled out both to commercial and GCC. You click that, your hand is raised, and in this environment where I'm the only one here, I don't get to see much of this, but you can see that it's filled in here, and I've got a yellow hand next to my name. So whoever would raise their hand would get that yellow hand next to it. If we had our 9 people up on the screen, I'd also see that yellow hand on the on the screen of active participants as well. I think even a little yellow square or something goes around them as well. But anyway, that hand goes up, and then of course I can lower my own hand, and I believe other people can lower your hand as well, which would in theory be used when I know I have already addressed you. So they're just trying to keep track of whose hands are really up. So that's a useful one, especially in a large meeting if you're trying to have an organized way of chiming in versus kind of talking over each other. So that's the A in STAR, ask a question. And then the R was the read chat, which basically means, I feel like a typical user, like in many of my meetings, I kind of sit on the people pane to either monitor mute buttons or see who's in the meeting, especially if it's my meeting. But your typical user, I think, would sit more so in the chat pane or nothing, like like this view. But I would think they'd sit in the chat pane to see if any chats are coming through, and obviously to put a chat if needed. So yeah, if there was any view that I would think people would sit in, it would be what we're seeing here. Your attendees here, or your participants, videos, whatever, and then the chat on the side. And maybe switch back and forth between participants and chat. But yeah, this lets you see what, if anybody's putting something in the chat area, and obviously lets you participate in the chat. The little extra stuff I'd say about this is I have seen people who have used their mobile phones specifically for the chat, just kind of like a second screen experience. So they'll have their mobile phone on the desk, specifically looking at the chat, so that way they can keep that off on their desktop view, have a full view of everything, and especially if they're presenting, it lets them present fully while having their chat on a second screen on their mobile phone. That could also be achieved with a second browser logged into Teams. I could be in this meeting through the desktop and the browser, and then on the browser have that meeting chat showing. And then what will come to GCC, and I think may already be or is coming to commercial, if it's not there already, is a pop-out chat. So that will help with that as well. So being in this meeting in a pop-out experience, kind of giving you two screens even in the desktop environment. So more ways to kind of interact or have that meeting chat showing, I think, will be coming in the future. So that's the meeting chat experience. And so that's if I go back here, that is the 4 minimum things that I think are useful for a new someone who's new or not familiar with working in Teams. Obviously, even as you can see from this graphic, there are other buttons and things to be clicked, but I tried to keep it as simple as possible. So that is being a star in a meeting. Again, we still got a few more minutes here, so you still have some time to put some questions in the chat. So I'll hang out for a few minutes. Actually, I see another one come in. Believe there's varying functionality based upon a participant on how, I guess, a participant enters, both based upon browser limitation, no share screen if you do not use Chrome or Edge, that's correct. But also if they enter using the browser without authentication. Can you explain this further and how to advise people how to avoid these limitations? For instance, making sure you enter your email password and email when prompted so Microsoft recognize you're a valid user, provides all functionality while attending, or whatever people need to do to be recognized. I mean, this concept of authenticating, I mean, would be more about, folks in your org, I guess, joining. Obviously, teams will know them, but, a normal Teams meeting is not necessarily a respecter of persons. And, anybody on the planet can join that Teams meeting, and they can do so um, anonymously if needed. Yeah, I guess it just depends. I mean, your meeting participants could be anyone from someone who's never heard of Teams, this is their first meeting, to someone who has Teams already but in another tenant, to someone who's in your tenant that has Teams. Um, and yeah, so just I could, 3 or 4 different, ways to kind of come in. But yeah, certainly if you sign in, yes, you're going to get, the most, experience, because Teams knows or can associate with your ID and things like that. But I don't know if there's a one size fit all. It kind of depends on who that user is that's joining the meeting, what they have or don't have. Are they Teams users? Are they Teams free users? Are they just a person with internet, coming in? I think it would depend. But certainly, yes, if you have Teams, yeah, outside vendors or whatever, logging in using the Teams client, all of those things will help give you the best experience. But it's a big it depends question. It depends on the settings of the person, the tenant of the meeting, that, what are the settings of the tenant in which that meeting is occurring? What have they set for, what participants can do? What are the settings on the tenant of the person that's joining who has Teams? There's a lot of variations and variables there. So I don't have a one size fits all answer to that concept. So hopefully that probably didn't answer it, but maybe that gave a little insight. So I will hang out for a minute or two more as our time is approaching here. Hopefully this was helpful. Again, we'll do this. I do this every week. I plan to continue at least for the foreseeable future, every Friday, 10 a.m. Those that are here don't have to explain how to get here. You use the aka.ms link, which gets you here to the meeting on Fridays. And when it's not Friday, that same link will get you to the placeholder to show you past recordings. So I'll put the recording of this meeting here sometime later today. You'll see that on the YouTube playlist. So again, I'll hang out for a sec, but hope this was helpful. And for those that want to drop and get a couple minutes back on their day on this lovely Friday, feel free to drop. And thanks for joining. So I don't see any more questions, so I'll go ahead and end for today. Thanks again. See you next week.